the use of renewable electricity without the expensive infrastructure or long-term PPAs. So I'll hand over to Paul.
Great. Thank you, Matt, for the introduction and the setup. And thank you all joining us here today to share our approach to solving this challenge for the AMPC membership group. So just as a little bit of background context, Enosi, we're an Australian technology company that specialise in enabling organisations, well, any consumer actually, from residential to the largest of commercial and industrial consumers, to be able to effectively trace your energy and effectively buy your energy direct from a solar or wind farm. The reason we've reached out to you and the reason we connected with Matt and the team at AMPC is because we're also running and leading a project through the Race for 2030 CRC initiative, which I will touch on towards the latter half of this presentation and explain the logic here. So I'm just going to set up the session here with a bit of upfront context as to some of the challenges that I'm sure you're well aware of facing, first of all, the AMPC membership group, you know, your own member meat processing facilities on the top right-hand side, consumers more generally, and also the challenges that face solar and wind farms. And as I'm going through this, we've got a relatively small, but no doubt very, very powerful team. So I would much prefer, rather than just blasting through a bunch of PowerPoint slides here, let's make this interactive and let's try and tailor this conversation to your specific needs and your specific challenges. So while I'm just articulating the challenges as we perceive you're facing on the top right-hand side here, maybe if you want, if there's any other particular needs that you're wanting to address, or indeed questions throughout the presentation, please do just jump on the chat and type in. And I'd particularly like clarification of particularly the key needs that you're facing in your own facilities. So what we understand is, of course, a big chunk, I think it's 70% from my recollection of the conversation with Matt, of your processed meats get exported, and a large chunk is to Europe and North America. And as we all know, the Biden administration and the EU are proposing to impose some sort of carbon tariff on those countries that don't have commitments to net zero and so on. So we understand that is a concern that you might be thinking about. Of course, every organisation out there is faced with increasing requirements around transparency and disclosure of sustainability and carbon footprint at large, and of course other aspects of compliance. High power prices, I'm sure I don't need to tell you about that. It's a curse of the Australian energy sector that we all pay a lot of money for power. And ironically so in our country, because we're blessed with copious amounts of sunshine and wind. And we're blessed also with the ability now to power using sunshine and wind at a lower price than coal or other fossil fuels. So our logic is simply large consumers, well, any consumer ultimately should be able to capitalize on that. And that is just what we do. And then finally, of course, over and above the sort of international flavor, just our customers at large, staff at large, stakeholders broadly across the ecosystem are increasing flagging sustainability issues. So what about helping address those things? If there's any additional problems that you have, just pop them in the chat if you would. Offer, well, the options are carbon offsets, green power, or variations thereof, some variation of certification that presents us to some extent. Ironically, you may or may not be aware of this, but the same challenges are on the opposite side of the table. Particularly if you're a small to mid-sized solar or wind farm, it's tough for them to go to market and sell direct. Well, frankly, they can't unless they cut a PPA. So we're enabling, our software platform basically bridges that gap as we're trying to articulate on this slide here. Effectively, what we do through a platform that we built that we call PowerTracer is allow consumers to effectively be able to buy direct from the source. And in simple terms, the way we do that is we simply, our software connects to the meter in your business and the meter in the solar or the wind farm, and 24/7 matches the two. And hence the language of PowerTracer. We provide traceability of your energy 24/7 back to the source of that generation. And we therefore enable organizations like yourselves to be able to trace that proportion of your energy ultimately that could be matched to a solar farm or a wind farm or battery, or for those of you lucky enough to have put large rooftop solar on, I don't know, some part of your premises perhaps. Each of those different sources of energy we can trace to and demonstrate exactly how much of your energy is coming from each of those locations, and ultimately progressively increase that percentage of renewables. What does that mean? Ultimately, on the bottom left-hand side, we believe that delivers honest renewable power because you can see where your energy is coming from and it's at lower prices. I've got a couple of slides here just on what PowerTracer looks like to give you a flavor of what it looks like. So in simple terms, our platform integrates with our retailer partners. As I'm sure you're all aware, in Australia, like every other major energy marketplace around the world, it's a heavily regulated and legislated environment, and you have to buy your energy via regulated retailers. So our go-to-market is by partnering with the major retailers, and I'll touch on those that we partner with later on. And those retailers integrate PowerTracer into their offering to you, such that over the course of a month, you can see on this slide, you can see the proportion of the wind that this particular consumer, who happens to be my boss, Steve Hoy, who's dialed in here, our CEO. You can see what proportion of his energy in the part of the bar chart here that's heavy gold, that proportion of energy that came from wind, and the balance, you can see probably grayed out at the bottom, the proportion of energy that came from other sources, be it in the community or be it from the residual, otherwise known as the electricity grid. Another view of this for a large commercial customer in Queensland, Brisbane Ports. This is a live take on their environment, where they actually, for those of you that have got solar rooftop on your businesses, these guys have as well. And what you're looking at here is where we're showing a trace between energy that is generated on top of their cruise ship terminal. Ironically, a system that was deployed in February of last year, and they haven't seen a cruise ship since. So they have a lot of energy going spare, and we're sharing that across other buildings in their network. For those of you that don't have rooftop solar, think of it just as being access to a solar farm. Fundamentally, it's exactly the same in terms of the traceability context. But for those of you that do have rooftop solar, well, we can give you the best of both worlds. We can do access to we can share access from your own rooftop solar across other buildings, across the grid, wherever they may be, as long as they're connected across the grid. And the benefits of this approach is, because your energy is traced direct to the source, our goal is that we eliminate greenwashing. We argue that net zero has its place for some things, and I'm sure it's a particularly hot topic for agriculture at large. But in the energy space, for electricity, we believe net zero should be replaced by true zero. You can access energy now that is genuinely carbon free. So why should you pay to have to pay extra to offset that? That's ultimately the greenwashing, helping you get the right mix of renewables to match generation. Our software provides that data 24/7 in the 30-minute increments that the grid operates in, soon to be 5 for those of you that know that. You can actually see, if you look closely, there's actually 48 bar chart on this day view. Gives you a bunch of other additional benefits here, because when you've got this data across all of your different meters, across all of your facilities, whatever it may be, a tracer will give you the insights ongoing that will help you figure out how to do that in the best and most effective possible way, because you're getting this data 24/7. So this slide is trying, for those of you familiar with how the energy marketplace works, this slide is trying to articulate how the market currently works under current regulations and what Enosi is doing that's disrupting and making life a lot easier for us all to basically access cheap renewables. On the left-hand side, in this sort of yellowy boxed area, currently there's about 28% of the energy in the NEM marketplaces of Southern Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, ACT, South Australia. It's about 28% renewables through solar and wind and hydro. 72% comes from fossil fuels. Right at the moment, for those of you that already investigated this, you'll know, you can claim 100% renewables just by accessing energy straight from the grid like this, and then buying a bunch of what are called renewable energy certificates, otherwise known as LGCs in Australia. So irregardless of where you actually source your energy from, you can claim it's renewable by just buying those certificates. Or you can put in place a PPA direct to a solar or wind farm and provide a greater certainty of where the actual energy is sourced from, depending on the structure of that PPA. Well, our argument is, why go with pieces of paper called LGCs when you can trace your energy back to the source and effectively deal direct with that source? So our model on the right-hand side changes that model. Now, what you see on this chart is 87% of the energy in this particular scenario coming from solar wind farm. This is actually a graph that we put together for a very large financial services business, where they asked us to profile their energy and look at the match. And we identified, because they're broadly speaking a 9-to-5 business, we could match them to solar and wind 87% of the time. And what that means is that arguably certificates become optional. And arguably also, if you don't particularly need the specific regulated requirement of LGCs, as I understand you don't, if you do want traceability, you could make it optional, for example, just on the 13%, perhaps. But regardless of that conversation around the certificates, and I can go into that in more depth later with you for those that are interested, we're helping you radically increase the source of energy that's coming from renewables, while at the same time keeping costs comparable, if not actually reducing them. So that's basically what we do. Matt, on you go.
Not a question yet. It was just that, and the slide you just explained was all clear, but prior to that, you were dropping in and out. So maybe if you turn your camera off, it might help the connectivity.
Oh, no worries.
Yep.
Any questions I've missed, Matt, that I should recover before I keep going?
No, I had a question. Can I ask a question?
Go for it.
That was good, that traceability explanation slide you've just been through. As far as the proportion of renewable electricity and standard, dirty grid electricity, does a retailer have a different product where you need to negotiate with them on that proportion, or how does that happen? Is it just something that's coincidental?
The first, Matt, different retailers have access to different renewable generators. Some of them own them, some of them have their own contracts in place with third-party owned facilities. And our different retail partners have a different mix of renewables in their portfolio. So some have access to certain solar farms, certain wind farms. Momentum is owned by Tassie Hydro, so they've got a lot of hydro in their portfolio. So our approach, and we're fast forwarding a little bit to the next steps here, but you raise a really good question, Matt. Our approach for those of you that want to progress and want to ask us to help you source a clean energy offer for your facility will be, first of all, to understand what your energy profile looks like in order to put that together in an offer to retailers, and then send that out to our different retailers and say, come back to us with your offer that best maximizes from your portfolio of renewables the percentage of energy that you can source from them to demand. Yeah. So in other words, for those of you, you've all got, as I understand it, a whole lot of refrigeration running 24/7. Now, obviously, you can't power that with a solar farm overnight. So solar will play a part of the role, but it won't necessarily play all of the role. So we'll look at those demand profiles 24/7, 365, and we'll share them with the retailers, and we'll say, look at those profiles and come back to us with retail offers that give you, the AMPC member, the abattoir, the best mix of maximized renewables, like this sort of 87% or whatever that percentage is, and at the same time, the best combination of cost. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. That's a good explanation. Others might have questions as well. I'll leave that to others. Thanks, Paul.
No worries. And please, team, it's a fairly small group, so do feel free, hit the chat or just jump off mute whenever you're ready, whenever you want. I'll touch on the EnergyTag project. Now, for those of you in sustainability roles or interested in the broader sustainability piece, this is very much front and center of a related initiative. So in other words, right at the moment, even before I start with this slide, we can help you source retail offers for your facilities going to market. And I've got a slide that will explain that in a little while. But before I get to that, I thought I'd just introduce what this project is all about, because we're running a project with Race for 2030, which is, AMPC is a valued partner in. And our project will be the only initiative connected with an international standards organization called EnergyTag. It's a really, really exciting project. So I want to just share a little bit around what this is about to explain a kind of a value add that we would love you to also participate in. Let's call it as an optional extra to just us helping you source renewables. So let me start with a bit of a storyline. Google, top right-hand side, there's a little graph here on this slide that came out of a paper that Google wrote last year. They've claimed 100% renewable energy globally for quite a few years now, through having their own PPAs to wind and solar farms around the world. But their scientists actually called them on it last year. And long story short, they did an analysis. And this graph that you can see on the top right-hand side identified that with this particular data center in Iowa, I'm sure you all know data centers just guzzle energy. This particular data center actually matched demand with the generation from the wind farms that they had in the PPA 61% of the time. 61% of their energy was matched to those specific wind farms. Google thought about this for a while and said, hey, that's not good. We need to close that gap. We can't claim to be genuinely renewable with only a 61% match, because what that means is 39% of the time, we're actually sourcing energy from fossil fuels, even though we're buying the certificates to claim 100% renewable. It's very straightforward when you think about it. Now, they have then set a goal globally to become 100% renewable 100% of the time, for every kilowatt hour of energy and every hour of every day to be sourced 100% renewable by 2030. Then there's been a big pile on. Microsoft, a whole bunch of other tech firms, IBM, Salesforce, and so on have all jumped on the bandwagon. The US government has now done the same. Biden, as part of their big job plan that they announced a couple of months ago, their $2 or $3 trillion initiative that Biden's driving, has made the same commitment that the entire US government will buy 100% renewable energy 100% of the time by 2035 in their instance. The biggest energy buyer, I think, on the planet. And even here in Australia, just on this bottom left-hand side or middle left-hand side, there's a group of councils in the Hunter region of New South Wales, 7 councils plus Hunter Water, 200 gigawatt hours per annum, so a decent chunk of consumption, have just issued an RFI, basically saying exactly exactly the same thing. They've acknowledged you cannot power streetlights, big source of their own consumption, from a solar farm. We get that. So we'd like the retailers to come back to us with a solution that gets us as close as possible to 100% renewable as fast as we can. EnergyTag, on you go, Matt.
Another question, sorry.
Go for it.
And I find this really fascinating because it relates to our red meat industry. Yep. As you know, we have a carbon neutral aspiration of 2030, yep, which means the whole red meat industry will have net zero emissions by 2030. Now, you don't get to that place unless you buy a hell of a lot of credits.
Yep.
Come 2030. So what you're saying is that perhaps buying credits are becoming less creditable.
Yes.
And that being transparent about your source of electricity is just as important.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Exactly right. The EnergyTag initiative is being driven, or it started in Europe. You probably don't know a bunch of these brands. You'll all know Microsoft and Google and some of the big IT brands, but Engie and Iberdrola on the top right-hand side here are the 6th and the 7th largest energy companies on the planet. If you add all of the Australian energy market together and multiply by 2, you've got a business about the size of Engie, which is head office out of France, but is a global player. Here in Australia, some of you might know Simply Energy. They're an Engie subsidiary. Iberdrola is actually bigger again. They're based out of Spain, another very large European retailer. OVO, another big UK retailer on the right-hand side, a bunch of grid operators. Statkraft is the Danish, Energinet, etc. These are big brands that have basically come together to help behind EnergyTag to help set the international standard for 24/7 energy matching. And this second bullet point here is what this is about. A renewable certificate that can only be surrendered if you can demonstrate that you match your consumption to the generation, the production, in the same hour, the same day in which it was produced. In other words, you can demonstrate traceability. So our EnergyTag project, our Race for 2030 project that we're leading here, our research partners will be UNSW. Matt's already in conversation with our PhD and professor who are leading the research aspect out of UNSW. We'll also have both Monash Uni in Melbourne and Curtin in WA participating as research partners. And then we're looking to have a bunch of C&I consumers, a bunch of large commercial industrial businesses, and hopefully some of you on this call, which is why we're talking about it, where we will actually trace your energy as part of this. So we've already signed up Mervac, we've signed up UNSW themselves. They've got a PPA to a solar farm. Monash have a big PPA to a wind farm. And we're looking at a number of other C&I consumers to be able to do that tracing. Canva, some of you might know the software company that has a PPA also to a mix of solar and wind. And our goal there in having you involved is that you will therefore be able to contribute to this EnergyTag initiative. And then you can see, I mentioned earlier, our energy partners. I haven't listed them all here, but these are the guys that we already have contractual relationships with or are well progressed with. These are the guys that if you want us to source a traced contract, we will go to these guys to get you the combination of best price and best renewable match. And through this piece of research in EnergyTag, what you guys will get as C&I consumers is you'll get the data on your own consumption. You'll get this anyway out of PowerTracer, but you'll get the data on your own consumption that will help you understand any changes to your consumption profile as a result of efficiency, as a result of DER, as a result of rooftop solar, whatever you might do. You'll be able to anticipate and plan around them. You'll be able to think around what's the best way for you to continue to invest in storage or whatever it may be. progressively, continually reduce cost by increasing the percentage of energy that you source from renewables, and therefore reduce the amount that you need to spend in offsets, for example. And ultimately drive demand side pressure, help actually force the pace of the transition to renewables, while at the same time saving money. Obviously, you're demonstrating leadership along the way, and we are one of 11 EnergyTag projects that are happening around the world. Microsoft's helping lead one in Europe. Google is leading one out of the States. We are leading the only one in Australia, and I think there is only one other even in Asia. So we'd love to have you front and center of setting that international standard. So what will we do for you? For those of you that would like us to source this traced energy, what will happen behind the scenes? You see the words PPA in here, but in reality, it's what's called a sleeve PPA, which for those of you not familiar with the language means basically the legals are radically simplified for you. The retailer packages up the right combination of solar, wind, hydro, whatever it may be, into an offer for you and figures out how to fill the gaps when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing. That's the concept of sleeving. And they present that to you as an energy offer. For those of you concerned about the length of traditional PPAs, I'm sure many of you have heard about 6, 8, 10, 12-year PPAs. Our approach with sleeve PPAs is to keep them short, typically sort of 2 to 3 years, something of that time frame, typically the same sort of length as you probably have now in your contracts. Again, this will vary by retailer to some extent, but that's generally the approach. The retailer, ultimately, it will be them that you will be contracting with. They will have Power Tracer embedded in their solution to you. Optionally, if you wish, and we'd love to have you involved, you can be part of EnergyTag and you can be part of setting that research standard and part of the knowledge sharing. Of course, within that knowledge sharing, we fully recognize there's confidentialities and sensitivities around this data. So as there is with all the members, so that'll be baked in, that confidentiality in terms of anonymizing data and so on. So our process, what we do from here is we'd love to reach out to you after this and just see, are you interested in pursuing this? Our approach will be then to ask you to sign a simple MOU. It's a straightforward tool. Matt's already got a copy of it. It's simply giving us the authority to go to market on your behalf to get alternative offers. There's no commitment on your part. There's no obligation on your part. And more importantly, perhaps from your perspective, we're not charging you for this. We will do this simply because we want to accelerate the sign up of the C&I consumers. And in the interest of transparency, the retailers, we build the retailers for our software. We're not a charity, you'll be unsurprised to know. And we can share with you those costs transparently if you want to know them. Then once you agree to that, we'll ask you for data. We obviously need energy consumption profiles, meter data from you. If you don't have that, it's a simple letter of authorization that you can give us to access that from your current energy provider or meter provider. We'll then navigate the process of getting quotes from retailers. We'll analyze them, come back to you with recommendations, and you will then be in a position to contract direct with those retailers. And that, oops, there's probably a little bit of detail. That is basically it from my perspective. So let me open up now to questions.
Paul, that was, for me, that was a really good presentation and brought up a lot of important questions. I can't see any of the participant questions at this stage unless Amanda, maybe there's one there now. Is there one there? Thanks, James. Great presentation, says James. But I did have a question, Paul, and it goes back to one of the slides where you were talking, you mentioned that if someone already has solar, they can export that to a premise they nominate. Is that right?
Exactly right. We need to obviously reflect it as part of the contract that we go to the retailers with, but that's exactly right. So this is So this is the Port of Brisbane, where they've got a decent sized system. I think it's 780 kilowatts on the cruise terminal roof, and they're exporting a lot. So what you're actually looking at here is the view of Power Tracer on their main office block, which is just, it's not behind it's not behind an embedded network or a microgrid. It's just trading across the grid and basically sharing that energy with another of their buildings. So that's basically a yes to your question, Matt.
So thanks, Paul. Is that export on the basis of time matching, time and
Yes.
volume matching?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it can be to multiple buildings. We're actually expanding this. What you're looking at here, dating back in March, was just connecting to one single office. We're looking at with a number of clients with very large deployments, sharing across multiple businesses and multiple buildings, I should say. And some clients are taking a step forward and extending these exports out to staff under resi contracts, which is a bit of a digression, but it's a clever little innovation that may be of interest to some of you.
That's a very good point, because our members like to have good relationships with their community, etc. So it may be possible that if an existing solar system at an abattoir, they might be able to time match that with their staff or their stakeholders in a community.
Exactly right. Exactly right. We're doing exactly that for a company called Hunter Douglas. They're a large manufacturer. Some of you might know the Luxaflex brand. They make blinds and plantation shutters. They've got, again, another big solar system of a similar size to Port of Brisbane, 750 kilowatts, I think it is, generating a lot of energy for the business. But at weekends, when the business is not fully running, there's a lot that's just being exported there. Yeah, so we help them go to market, and they share that now with their staff.
I was going to say that, yeah, weekends is an ideal opportunity.
Absolutely. And you can do it with your supply. Forgive me, Matt. You can do it with your supply chain. So, you might have suppliers or other businesses that you're connected with in your particular regional locations. Nothing to stop us extending it to them as well, which helps you, for those of you motivated with Scope 3 emissions, it helps you address that. And obviously there's a community benefit there. So there's a few ways of adding some clever innovation here that's kind of a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And the retailer obviously would need to be involved in that.
Correct.
I assume.
We need to scope that in from the start, really.
Yep. I think that's really good, because with most of the problems we have around the environmental issues, we like to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And this is another technology that says, okay, we are part of the solution, not just on site, but potentially across supply chain, and even with members of staff on weekends, but for instance.
Yep, absolutely.
There was another note there, Clint, the deal that you broke.
Supply and installation. So Clint's question, for those of you that haven't seen it, is the deal that you broker on our behalf includes supply and installation. So we don't do solar installation. We are simply an enabler for the retailer. Having said that, Origin in particular, I think probably most of the retailers, but Origin in particular are big fans of us, because they are enthusiastically slapping as much rooftop solar as they can on major clients' buildings, so that they will happily incorporate the provision of solar panels if you want a retailer to do that. And one of my colleagues on the management team comes out of a long history with a commercial solar installation company, so we have plenty of contacts in that space if that's of use to you. But no, our contract doesn't include that itself.
Does that make sense, Clint? That's him. Thanks for that. Yeah, Clint says cheers. Yeah, that's good, Paul, because important for everyone to know that there's basically no infrastructure involved with this apart from the existing infrastructure. It's really just time matching clean electrons, isn't it?
That's exactly right. All you need is a smart meter. If you don't have them already, the retailers are rolling them out as fast as they can around the country at no cost. So we need no hardware at all.
Yep. Any other questions coming through. I had another one around the clean energy regulator, Paul. Part of EnergyTag,
yes,
which is really important part of this, and you mentioned there's only 11 of these projects in the world that are looking to demonstrate for their own clean energy regulator that EnergyTag should be adopted and endorsed by the regulator because it brings transparency. How do we do that in Australia? Is there a chance?
Yeah, great question.
I mean, this project is part of that, but can you explain a bit more about how that happens?
So the chairman of EnergyTag actually was a senior executive, in fact, may still be connected with the European equivalent to the Clean Energy Regulator, the EU level equivalent to that. So they are, for want of a better expression, all over this initiative at a European level. We have already engaged the Clean Energy Regulator in Australia. They know about this RACE project. They will be involved by us throughout the RACE project, because obviously what we're proposing is basically to significantly improve that model. We're not proposing to rip it up. We're proposing just that it is, well, frankly, a little bit overdue for some significant improvement here.
Yeah, very good. So again, I see that as being part of the solution.
Exactly right.
Yeah, part of the solution about transparency around clean electricity. Amanda's got a question there for you, Paul. Can you read that?
Okay, Amanda's question, for those of you not looking at the chat, this type of project is currently being driven proactively by the sounds of it. Yes, that's right. Do you see a time in the future where customers, i.e. large supermarkets, may require this level of commitment? Yes. So I'm sure all of us that were glued to the Olympics will have seen plenty of ads from Woolworths promoting their recently signed PPAs and their commitments to RE100 by 2025, or net zero by 2025, I should say, and Coles, Aldi, and so on the same. And yes, for those of you not familiar with the expression, Scope 3 is the next step on their sustainability paths, Scope 3 being the emissions associated with their supply chain. And obviously you're front and center of that. So without a doubt, you may be aware of this happening in the EU and the Biden administration with regard to carbon tariffs over there. It's going to come equally quickly, possibly even faster here, simply because of the major supermarkets and other players, frankly, demanding it.
That's great. Thanks, Amanda.
Great question.
Thanks, Paul.
Keep up with the questions, team.
I've got one in the meantime, and it relates to the next steps around this project. I really see this as being quite easy for members to be involved in, because there's only 2 steps involved. That is an expression of interest for your MOU.
That's right.
And then upon engagement in the project, authorise you to access the electricity data.
Correct.
That's it.
Correct.
And then a report's available at the end. Can you explain what will be in that report?
So we'll do an analysis of responses. We'll get quotes for you. We'll do an analysis of them and provide you with our views on the comparison of each. So because different retailers, as you prompted with your question earlier, Matt, will come back to each meat processor with different matches of wind or solar or hydro or whatever based on their own portfolio. Well, based on their portfolio and your locations, because retailers try to avoid matching to energy consumption across state boundaries because of the legislative and grid implications associated with that. So it will partly be impacted by that as well. So we'll analyze that. We'll come back and review each of the offers that we get for you and provide you with a comparison, including things like the percentage of energy consumption 24/7, 365 that the offer will match, and obviously a cost comparison, and help you figure out the weightings between those. So yeah, basically the recommendations based on those 2 main levers. Did I explain that okay? Is that any other questions there?
There probably will be, I'd imagine. If it's not now, it could be later on. Because it's new and it's innovative, it takes a little bit to think about it, which is fine. And no doubt there'll be more questions, perhaps offline or through the EOI process that we'll run with people that attended today or people that are not here that are interested. So from our side of things, we send out that EOI and attach a MOU and ask for expressions of interest in being part of that, according to the MOU. We do have one more question. It's coming through from Chris Edwards. It's probably not finished typing yet. Yeah,
that's good. That's exactly right, Matt. It's always fun watching the typing happening, isn't it, on these things? It's a long question from Chris.
Yeah, no pressure.
Feel free to come off mute, team, if that's easy. Or I wonder if you're allowed to. Maybe they're not able to come off mute. Do we want to open it up so that, because it's not a massive group, if that's easier for you?
It's through there. Can you read?
If there's no, okay, so if there's no smart meter installed, is the program still viable? So the answer is we need a smart meter because that's the smarts that enable our software to connect. That's all we need. And retailers will install them for you at no cost. There's benefits to them in having smart meters. So they're progressively rolling out. Everybody in Victoria has already got one. Yeah, apparently people aren't able to unmute. Amanda, if you're able to maybe let people unmute so they can just talk, that I'm open to that. It's not a particularly big audience here. But yeah, so in other words, you need a smart meter, but it won't cost you anything.
So I'm just going through and I'm allowing people to use their mic now. So hopefully that will work.
Good on you. Thanks, Amanda.
Oh, we should have done that at the beginning anyway.
The joys of technology.
So everyone's got an open mic soon, have they? Or they can unmute themselves at least. So if anyone's got questions or comments and you're able to unmute yourself, please feel free. We've got at least 10 minutes left in the webinar. So there's probably can be questions, or if there's not, later on.
Let me just give you might be thinking this Enosi, this is a weird sounding name of a company. I'll just give you a little bit of background here. Steve Hoy, our CEO, is actually on the webinar and is muted obviously so far, but that's fine. So Steve is our CEO and co-founder and the brains behind the our Power Tracer platform. He's spent his whole career in the energy industry here, from joining what is now Ausgrid 35 odd years ago and going through UNSW to get his bachelor's degree at Ausgrid, and then the rest of the time in the industry. The last 7 years in particular, he spent with IBM as IBM's global leader of smart. Some of the genesis behind Power Tracer, because some of the initiatives that his team put in place really triggered the idea. The rest of the team, Bill is our CEO. He's a deep background in banking and financial trading, which is useful because obviously we're energy trading. Grant, I mentioned, one of our team comes out of the commercial solar business. That's Grant. He's got a deep and long experience in the commercial PV sector, so he understands the space very well. And Joel is our CTO, who's worked with Steve for over 5 years now. What he doesn't know about energy trading systems, I don't think is worth knowing. My role is working relationships like this, and we've got Sonia in here as one of the development team. And you can see a pretty heavy-hitting advisory board, including Professor Renata Regan. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of confidence about this strangely named little company.
Thanks for that, Paul. The other question I had was, with the project, how many members do you think you can handle? Is there a maximum or a minimum, and what sort of electricity consumption might be sort of what you're looking for in each of those participants, or is there no minimum or maximum?
There's not really a minimum or a maximum. Pretty much every abattoir is a pretty major consumer. The larger your consumption, frankly, the more attractive you are to the retailers. It's pretty obvious. Obviously, if you're doing 10 gigawatt hours a year versus 1 gigawatt hour, that's going to be of interest. But even if you're in the ones or whatever, that's still plenty of consumption. And if you're less than that, do reach out anyway. If we get a group together, if there's a few of you come together and your energy agreements expire at similar times, that's the other thing that we need to know. I mean, we're working with you to put in place an energy agreement. So by definition, you need to be out of contract sometime within the next few months, ideally. Obviously, we can work with you in the longer term as well, but from the perspective of this particular project in EnergyTag, we're ideally targeting those that are going to be off contract within the next 3 to 6 months. And if you're a smaller consumer, well, we'll try and bundle everybody up together to some degree. You'll all get individual energy offers, but if there's, for example, 5 of you, we'll put you out there to the Origins, the AGLs, the Simplies all at the same time. You'll all get individual bids, but it'll only motivate them to try and give and leverage the AMPC brand, as it were, to give economies of scale. So the more the merrier.
And that's an interesting point, Paul. Some smaller members or even medium members may be part of a buying group already. How would you approach that?
We're happy to support that buying group. We're very happy to support that buying group. This doesn't need to be limited. If you're in a buying group, so Matt, is some of your buying group outside of the AMPC group?
No, these are members within the group. They might be part of a buying group. And
well, that's perfect.
Yeah, so there may be no need to change retailer, just for the retailer to provide different features as part of that offer.
Well, that's exactly right as well. That is exactly right as well. They'll need to put together a different energy offer for you, but yes, that's exactly right. So we're doing that for a few other consumers who already have energy contracts in place or indeed PPAs in place. Yeah. We will be putting traceability across the top of them. So we'll just be, as you say, adding additional features to the energy offer.
Yeah. And so you've already got retailers that are interested in participating, haven't you?
We have. AGL, as you know, is a member of RACE, and they've signed on to our particular project already. And the other retailers that we're already partnered with, there's nothing to stop us going to them. They don't need to be a member of RACE. So we'll be going to all of them with your offers, with your deals. Yeah. So
there's a lot of flexibility with
Correct.
how it's arranged. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's probably no further questions I can see. Amanda, can you see? If there's no further questions, the next step, as I mentioned, will be that we can issue expressions of interest through our co-innovation managers to our members regarding the MOU, and then see what the interest is or what the questions are offline. And that will be the next step. I'd really like to thank you, Paul, for your presentation, which is completely new and out of the box and innovative. I reckon it was really, really good. So this is an existing project, so as part of our involvement in Race for 2030. So there's not a lot of setup required. There's no setup requirement really.
So Clint has asked a great question here. Yes, we'll share the presentation with you, Matt. It's updated obviously since the last one I sent you, so I'll send you this one for Matt to share with you all.
Yep. And Amanda's typing. Amanda, you can't unmute?
Yes, I can. Thanks. No, I was just saying thank you to everyone for attending and for them to reach out to you if they want further information or their co-innovation managers.
Indeed.
Right.
This recording will also go up on to the AMPC YouTube site as well. So if anyone wants to either review it or send the link to somebody you'll be able to get it hopefully by tomorrow off the AMPC YouTube channel.
Thank you very much to Matt and Amanda for setting this up and doing an admirable job of organising the tech and invitations and emceeing and what have you. That's most appreciated. And thank you to all of you from the different members, the different meat processors for joining us. Really appreciate your questions and interest, and look forward to being able to work with you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
See you next time.
Cheers.